Hello everybody, welcome to the Wonky Angle, where I talk about electronic music, both new and old. And today I'm talking about album number 6 from The Orb, Bicycles and Tricycles. Alright, now I've already gone over how I thought it was kind of weird that The Orb's previous album, Cydonia, was so frequently decided upon as either their worst or at least one of their worst albums. That one always felt like a complete experience to me, one that had its own feel that stuck out from their greater catalog in a good way, and that lots of critics were talking about how it felt like The Orb were losing all their creative steam there. I couldn't bring myself to agree on any level. If you want the album where they lost a lot of their creative steam, you got this project here. Yeah, Bicycles and Tricycles is a project that I've had a weird relationship with over the years. Back when I first heard it in high school, it may have been true that I wasn't exactly as mind-blown by it as I was by many of their other projects, but I still put it on pretty frequently and didn't feel like it was anything particularly out of place in their catalog. And there's still definitely some residual nostalgia factor left over from those days. But as the years have gone by, I've started to feel like this one's reputation for being one of the lowest points in their catalog has mostly been deserved. And it's not that this project is bad per se, it's just kind of It doesn't have any tracks I hate, but it doesn't have any that I love either. It has some good moments, but it contains none of my all-time favorite moments from them. A lot of this project either feels like leftovers that wouldn't have made the cut for other Orb albums, or random attempts at like a trendier, more hip-hop influenced sound that isn't always flattering to their style. Not to mention, in comparison to something like Cydonia, an album that even through its wild variety still felt like it was taking me on a journey and flowed together really well, Bicycles and Tricycles just feels like a random collection of ideas that don't really service each other or form any greater whole. It's their single most scattershot and incohesive project to this day. In terms of individual tracks, my thoughts have definitely shifted around a lot as I've listened to this thing more in preparation for this review. I remember thinking the opener Orb Is shopping version was fun way back in the day, and I do like the light and breezy intro and all the inclusions of jazzy trumpets, but the mildly hip-hop flavored beats and buzzing, almost acid-based make for a particularly dull, empty, and unsatisfying groove that's focused on for the majority of the track. Kind of an underwhelming and forgettable start to this project that unfortunately does also kind of telegraph the average quality of the rest of the album. It's kind of like a not as good version of EDM from Cydonia. Though you do get quite a few higher points all gathered together in this earlier stretch of the album. Aftermath may be as transparent a crossover single attempt as you can possibly get, to the point of not even being recognizable as The Orb at all. I never would have guessed Alex Patterson and Thomas Feldman had their fingers in this if I didn't already know. That said, for what it is, it's quite solid. The mix of chill hip-hop beats sounds really nice, MC Soom T's rap verses are quite nice. She's an enjoyable presence and fits well over this beat. And they follow up this most off-brand cut with one of their more on-brand cuts. I've always had a bit of a soft spot for The Land of Green Ginger. Its quirky mix of blipping techno-synths and whistling, while narrator Neville Jason tells an incomplete Dr. Seuss-like children's story about a wizard's portable garden that puts people under a spell and then disappears or something like that. And this is exactly the kind of bizarre goofiness that no one but The Orb would deliver, and I specifically come to them for. And despite a few uninteresting diversions into sparser beat switch-ups, the whole thing just has this, kind of charming quality to it that I've always been drawn to. It's definitely one of my favorite cuts here. Though again, it also kind of speaks to the album's average quality that this is one of my big favorites. It does come up short if you compare it to the best moments from pretty much all their previous albums. It's not as expansive, immersive, or tuneful as The Orb can be at their best. Still, The Land of Green Ginger, it's charming, it's hard to dislike. I like it. And similar thoughts on the next two tracks. Hell's Kitchen is kind of like what this album's opener should have been like. The way all those trumpet licks and banging rambunctious hip-hop beats get worked into a fairly dramatic-sounding mix of ambient pads is a lot more striking and fun to listen to, despite the slight datedness. And G-Strings is a nice, playful techno number with all these plucky melodic elements and a light but foot-tapping groove, even a little vocal chop thrown in there for good measure. Also a random outro with some sample of a guy talking about girl watching while reading a magazine. Because of course. I mean, this track also probably wouldn't rank among my absolute favorites they've ever done, but it is almost certainly the best track on the album. Its repetitive but low-key riffs are easy to get stuck in your head, but never become grating. And heck, it probably would have fit perfectly on their fairly toned-down next album, Okie Dokie It's the Orb on Compact, and been one of the better moments there. We'll get to that one later, but spoilers, I do feel like that's a much stronger album than this was. Anyway, the last big standout on here is track 7, Abstractions Transpanine Express. It may not be one of their more easily memorable cuts or have much of a hook at all, but its mix of cloudy and expansive ambient pads with fast-moving and whooshing beats with occasional phone message voices does make for a particularly immersive mix and probably the most properly immersive cut in the bunch. And there's even a bit of a reprise of those squirting water effects from Blue Room stuck in there at the end, which is kind of neat without feeling like a distracting callback. And there's also this loop of filtered drum beats that fade in and out right near the end that I swear I've heard somewhere else before and not in another Orb production. I can't figure out where exactly. That's probably gonna bug me, but yeah, good track. But the rest of this album mostly just merits ambivalent shrugs from me. There's two more hip-hop focused cuts that I'm not huge on, Prime Evil and LUCA. Prime Evil I seem to recall being a favorite back in high school, but I think more than anything I was more of a fan of the first minute of the track. There was a pretty cool mix of boom bap hip-hop beats and these little Rhodes electric piano loops that have a slight jazzy flavor in the beginning and always stuck out in my mind. Do. I like that part. But when I came back to this track and realized the part I remembered liking quickly disappears shortly after the track got started and meanders into a whole bunch of different other mixes of synth sounds that don't sound nearly as cool or memorable, and that was kind of disappointing. At least this track has a lot of progression to keep things interesting, even if its various sections don't really coalesce into anything and can often feel like a meandering mishmash of unrelated ideas. LUCA at least feels like a more fully developed track, although it might be the most dated sounding of them all, with all those various jock jam horn stabs, shouting samples in the background, and the one snippet of a rapper saying "keep on living" all over a less than pleasant mix of muddy and emotionless ambient pads. It's punchy and hard hitting, but kind of a mess. That one weirdly isn't even on the CD version I have here, though I'm not sure if it's getting cut makes for that much of a difference in quality in either direction. But at least that track has its own identity. The two that immediately follow it are glorified remixes of their classic tracks. From a Distance, Blastmaster v. The Corporal was a big favorite on first return listen, but shrunk on me quite a bit as I heard it more. On one hand, it does have one particularly banging and bouncy beat, a buzzing bass line, and alliteration, and various synth stabs that sounds like its own original track, and a particularly striking and fun one at that. But then it reprises a bunch of those voice pad samples from A Huge Ever-Growing Pulsating Brain, which feels like a lame attempt to remind people of when they were still in their heyday, and makes this track feel a lot less special than it would have been otherwise. Also, when the Corporal's auto-tuned, fake-sounding Jamaican voice comes in during the second half of the track, it's pretty annoying. Meanwhile, Tower 23, Spud v. Creature Mix, initially felt like an even more lame and watered-down rehash of Tower's a dub, right down to the similar title, similar beat, and similar harmonica lines. That said, this track actually grew on me. The dub groove on this one may not be as good as the original Towers of Dub, not really even in the same league, but if you ignore that context, it's perfectly solid for what it is. Also, I found out that it's a bit of a posthumous contribution from Dr. Alex's brother Martin Patterson, aka Creature, who unfortunately passed away 3 years before this album dropped. Yeah, it's still not exactly a favorite cut of mine, but it's not bad. But then the album ends with 2 straight ambient cuts, mostly care of Thomas Fellman, that are a lot more dead serious than anything else here, and feel pretty out of place as a result. When I first heard Kompania Grooved Ware Mix back in high school, I absolutely hated it. Its blocky ambience and menacing loops of pads and bell melodies that seemingly never changed over nearly 6 minutes made me feel like I was interminably suspended in purgatory or something. Nowadays I've come to enjoy that track for that exact reason. The constant loops do make for a particularly memorable hook, and the entire mix sounds especially dark and even borderline horrifying in a pretty cool way. That said, I do still believe this track has absolutely no freaking business being on this particular album. After all these varied mixes of goofiness and occasional hip-hop flares, to suddenly have this cut that sounds so dark and monolithic strikes me as particularly bad placement, and may have been the main contributor to my initial strong negative reaction years ago. The closer Dillman gave me a similar reaction when I first heard that as well, though this one hasn't grown on me like Kompania did. I don't hate it like I used to anymore, but neither have I come to particularly like it. The mix of sickly, sweet ambient pads and harsh, buzzing melodic textures just kind of feels oddly unpleasant to me in a way that's kind of hard to put into words. It's a feeling that much of their later album Baghdad Batteries also has for me, and I'll probably need to go into more when I cover that, especially since I know that album's got a lot more defenders than this one. But yeah, that's every track on Bicycles and Tricycles. As a side note, I also have been told that Jack Dangers from Meat Beat Manifesto contributed to this album in some regard. Though he is, it doesn't say what specifically he did or what track he's on, or it just says he's a performer in the album credits. So I guess that's cool. And I definitely never would have guessed that had you not told me either. But yeah, that's Bicycles and Tricycles. I mean, this thing does have its moments, and it's got enough value for me as a longtime Orb fan that I don't see myself outright deleting it from my iPod, but this one's pretty much just for the diehards like me. For a first-time Orb listener, this would be a terrible place to start. You get a bunch of sounds that feel kinda dated for the time and maybe sort of occasionally let you know what the Orb is all about, but none of which shows why they're so heavily revered. I mean, I guess if you started here and ended up really liking it, then you'd probably be in for even more trip as you hear their other stuff. But I kind of have a feeling this one wasn't going to be pulling in any new fans, either when it came out or for newer listeners, like even younger than me. If you're already an Orb diehard, you'll probably at least get something out of it. There are enough solid moments sprinkled throughout for me to at least say it's generally alright. And certainly none of it is offensive so much as just kind of underwhelming. But between all these less interesting moments, the dated moments, the complete lack of any kind of cohesion, and just the fact that even the best moments here can't really compete with the best moments on pretty much any of their other albums, I hate to say it, this one is kind of in the running for weakest album of theirs overall. At least they'd quickly bounce back after this, but yeah, if you decided to skip over this one entirely, I don't think you'd be missing out on anything essential. I'm overall feeling a 5.7 out of 10 on this one. But of course, this is just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, so leave the comments in the comment thing down there. Shout out to my Patreon supporters. They're awesome people. You want to add yourself to that list or make me review something, link to my Patreon is in the description. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time.